The archive was silent, as it had been for eons. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of perfect, ordered thought. Within its non-space, trillion histories were filed, each a shimmering thread of causality, from the birth of a star to the final, whimpering entropy of a galaxy. The auditors, curators of this cosmic library, moved through it not as beings of flesh, but as points of pure consciousness, their only purpose to observe, catalog, and ensure the integrity of reality's narrative. They were not gods, they were librarians, and their religion was order. For the past 73 millennia, Auditor Trainee 714, who in a moment of uncharacteristic whimsy had named his own consciousness node Xylar, had been tasked with the observation of a minor, volatile star system in an unfashionable spiral arm of the galaxy. His focus was its third planet, designated Earth. For most of its history, the file on Earth had been unremarkable, a standard catalog entry under Sentience, Class C Chaotic, Self-Limiting, The Species, a bipedal carbon form called Human, followed predictable patterns, Tribalism, Technological Discovery, Internecine Warfare, fleeting moments of artistic brilliance followed by long stretches of self-inflicted misery. Their story, while messy, had a coherent, if tragic, narrative arc. Then came their discovery of global and instantaneous information exchange. The file on Earth began to hemorrhage, the shimmering thread of its history frayed, then dissolved into a roaring, blinding fog of pure noise. The data stream from Earth was no longer a story. It was a billion stream of consciousness monologue delivered by a schizophrenic god. Xylar would spend his cycles trying to parse the influx. He would receive a signal containing a complex mathematical proof for faster-than-light travel, a stunning work of theoretical genius, immediately followed by a billion identical images of a feline creature with a caption that translated to, "I can has cheeseburger." He would catalog a transmission of soul-crushingly beautiful music, a symphony that spoke of love and loss with a depth that resonated across the archive, only to have it corrupted by an accompanying data packet that was just a 2-second video of a man falling off a chair, looped for 10 hours. The humans transmitted their wars in high definition, their acts of breathtaking cruelty alongside acts of profound, selfless love. They debated the meaning of existence on one data channel, while using another to argue with complete strangers about the optimal way to hang a roll of toilet paper. They created complex mythologies, vast, sprawling sagas with intricate characters and moral dilemmas, and they called them video games. They crafted short and nonsensical narratives with looping audio, designed to elicit a single diatheist explosive burst of what they called humor. And these memes replicated faster than any biological virus the archive had ever recorded. They were not just living their story, they were endlessly, chaotically rewriting it, mocking it, remixing it, and layering it with so much irony that meaning itself became a paradox. To Xylar, whose entire existence was predicated on the sanctity of a clean narrative, it was blasphemy. Earth was no longer a history to be archived. It was a bug in the system, a source of conceptual entropy that threatened to corrupt everything it touched. The breaking point came on what the humans designated a Tuesday. It was not a war nor a great discovery that caused the system failure. It was the global reaction to a single event a high-ranking politician had, during a televised debate, swatted a fly with such theatrical precision that the moment was captured from a dozen angles. Within one standard solar rotation, the archive's intake sector for Earth overloaded and crashed. An entire wing of galactic history, containing the sagas of 57 separate civilizations, was temporarily rendered inaccessible, overwritten by a tidal wave of data from Earth. The data consisted of millions of edited videos of the event set to dramatic orchestral scores, an estimated 1.4 trillion still images with satirical text overlays, thousands of lengthy analytical essays on the socio-political implications of Flygate, and a globally trending audio clip of a child's voice saying, "He did the thing." The sheer volume of collaborative, meaningless, and emotionally charged content generated by a single insect's demise was a phenomenon the archive's logic engines could not process. It was a narrative singularity. The elder auditors, their consciousness resonating with the cold fury of a frozen star, convened. Their consensus was swift and absolute. File 34 Gamma, Earth, was a terminal narrative corruption. The source must be sanitized, a full deletion from the cosmic record. But Xylar, his node vibrating with a frequency that bordered on forbidden individuality, intervened. A full deletion was messy. It left narrative voids, paradoxes in the timeline that would require centuries of painstaking editorial work. It was what was. He transmitted to the elders an inefficient solution. He proposed a more surgical approach. The chaos, he reasoned, could not be spontaneous. It had to have a source, a root node. He believed that if he could physically manifest on the planet, he could isolate the core flaw in their collective logic, perhaps a single philosophical concept or a small group of influential noisemakers, and neutralize it. It was, he argued, a simple debugging mission. To his surprise, the elders agreed. They were intrigued by the logic of his proposal and, perhaps, tired of the constant, irritating buzz of Earth's data stream. He was granted permission to manifest, a rare honor, and dispatched with a single directive excise the bug. Restore the narrative. Xylar chose his point of entry with analytical precision. Not a major political capital or a technological hub, but a location his scans identified as a nexus of maximum cultural flux and minimum strategic importance, a 24-hour roadside diner called the Starlight Griddle, situated on a desolate stretch of highway in the desert of Nevada. Here, he calculated, he could observe a cross-section of the species in a transient state, their guards lowered, their base programming exposed. He materialized in the restroom, his form coalescing from shimmering data into a physical vessel compiled from the statistical median of human appearance moderately tall, symmetrically featured, and utterly unremarkable. He wore simple, dark clothing, also calculated for optimal social camouflage. He stepped out of the restroom and into the hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, and the low murmur of conversation. He took a seat at the long formica counter, the cracked vinyl of the stool cool against his new body. The air was thick with sensory input he could not immediately catalog: grease, sugar, disinfectant, and something else. A strange, cloying aroma he later identified as despair. Behind the counter was the first human he would interact with, a female specimen named Maya. According to her plastic name tag, her movements were economical, born of exhaustion. Her eyes, shadowed with fatigue, held a cynicism that seemed ancient. She approached him, coffee pot in hand, boss, without a hint of surprise. The night shift at the Starlight Griddle was a magnet for the strange and the lost. A man who looked like a store mannequin having an existential crisis barely registered. "What'll it be, hun?" she asked, her voice raspy. Xylar consulted his internal files. "I require data," he stated, his vocal modulator perfectly replicating human speech, though without the subtle, illogical fluctuations of tone. "I wish to understand the root of your species' narrative incoherence. Maya paused, the coffee pot hovering. She stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then she gave a short, sharp laugh that sounded like grinding gravel. Right. You and every other guy who's had one too many at the bar down the road. You want coffee or not? Xylar recalibrated. His direct approach had been misinterpreted as a joke, a form of communication he found profoundly inefficient. "I will have the caffeinated beverage," he said. "And I would like to ask you about the utility function of humor." Maya poured the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug. "The what now? Humor," Xylar elaborated. "I have analyzed 17.4 zettabytes of your species' communications. A significant portion consists of deliberate logical fallacies, absurd juxtapositions, and non sequiturs designed to trigger an involuntary spasmodic respiratory response. It serves no discernible survival purpose. What is its function?" He was genuinely curious. It was a piece of their code he could not decrypt. Maya leaned against the counter, wiping a stray drop of coffee with her thumb. She looked him up and down, a flicker of something not fear, but a weary sort of pity in her eyes. "Look, buddy," she said, her voice softening slightly. "It's 3 a.m. The function of anything right now is just to get through the next 5 minutes. People laugh so they don't cry, or they laugh while they cry. Sometimes they just laugh because a squirrel fell out of a tree. Funny. It's not a program. It's just breathing." She gestured with her head towards a trucker in a booth, chuckling to himself as he scrolled through his phone. "Ask him. He's probably watching a video of a cat falling off a piano. Is it useful? No. But his rig broke down. His wife's mad at him. And for 10 seconds, a stupid cat is making it better. That's the function." Xylar processed this. The information was corrupt. It linked two opposing concepts, despair and amusement, as a functional pairing. It suggested that inefficiency was a coping mechanism for survival. This was not a logical system. He had come to find a bug in their programming, a flaw in their collective code. But as he sat there, the acrid taste of the cheap coffee registering on his new tongue, a terrifying possibility began to form in his consciousness. The bugs weren't an error in the code. The bugs were the code. The chaos was not the byproduct of their existence. It was the entire point. His simple debugging mission had just become infinitely complex. And he realized with a dawning horror that he was no longer in the clean, silent halls of the archive. He was in the field, surrounded by the noise, and the waitress who thought he was just another lonely weirdo was looking at him like he was the one who didn't make any sense. The realization settled not like a clean data point, but like a stain, spreading through the pristine architecture of his consciousness. Xylar sat motionless, the untouched mug of coffee slowly cooling, becoming a monument to his failed first diagnostic. Maya had moved on, her attention on a fresh wave of customers. A trio of teenagers buzzing with a restless energy that seemed to generate its own gravitational field. They ordered milkshakes and fries with a theatricality that suggested the act was the most important event of their young lives. Xylar shifted his focus from Maya, who represented a kind of weary, terminal acceptance of the chaos, to the other nodes in this small network. He needed more data. If the bug was the system, then he had to map the system's bizarre, illogical parameters. In a booth near the window sat the trucker Maya had pointed out, a large man whose name tag, stitched onto a faded denim jacket, read Skeeter. He was hunched over a plate of pancakes that looked more like an industrial insulation material, but his attention was entirely on the small, glowing screen in his hand. He would snort, then tap furiously, then shake his head with the gravity of a man deciphering ancient prophecies. Xylar decided this was his next point of inquiry. He slid off the stool and approached the booth, his movements smooth and unnervingly silent. "Pardon the intrusion," Xylar began, standing beside the table. Skeeter looked up, his eyes narrowed with the practiced suspicion of someone who spends too much time on the road and far too much time online. "You're that fella from the counter, the one asking about jokes. You a Fed." Xylar processed the term. "I am not an agent of your governmental bodies. I am a researcher." Skeeter grunted, a sound of profound disbelief. "Right, a researcher. What are you researching out here?" "The mating habits of tumbleweeds. I am researching the fundamental principles of your species' shared reality," Xylar said, his tone perfectly even. "For example, I am attempting to reconcile the conflicting data streams you are currently absorbing." He gestured toward Skeeter's phone. Skeeter glanced at his screen, then back at Xylar, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "You want to know what's really going on? Huh? It ain't what they're telling you. I'll tell you that for free. You think this is just a phone?" He held it up. "This is a battlefield, friend. Right here, I'm watching a video that proves the moon landing was faked, filmed in this very desert, by the way. But if I swipe over here," he did so with a dramatic flourish, "I've got a live feed from a private satellite, paid for by a consortium of real patriots, that clearly shows the secret alien base on the far side of the moon. And you know who's running it. The same lizard people who faked the landing in the first place. To throw us off the scent, Xylar's internal processors whirred, trying to create a coherent model. "The data is paradoxical," he stated. "The moon landing cannot be simultaneously a fabrication and a cover for an operational extraterrestrial facility." Skeeter leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's what they want you to think. It's quantum politics. See, it's both true and false at the same time, until a real patriot observes it. The lie protects the bigger truth. They hide the aliens by pretending they're not there, while also pretending they are there to make the people who know they're there sound crazy. You get it?" Xylar did not get it. He was experiencing a logic cascade failure. The human was presenting two mutually exclusive concepts as a single, unified theory, held together by a framework of pure, unsubstantiated belief. It was a self-sealing loop of irrationality. It was, in its own way, perfect. This was not a system bug. It was a feature of an entirely different kind of operating system, one that didn't run on true false binaries, but on a spectrum of, "Wouldn't it be interesting if..." He thanked Skeeter for the data and retreated to the counter, his core programming feeling strangely frayed. He had just witnessed the cognitive equivalent of dividing by zero. He turned his attention to another booth, occupied by a young couple who looked barely out of their teens. They weren't talking. The male, thin and anxious, was tracing patterns on the table with a bent fork. The female, her face pale under the harsh lighting, was staring out the window into the impenetrable dark. There was a story here, a narrative Xylar's senses were not yet equipped to read, but he could detect the powerful emotional field they generated, a mixture of fear, hope, and a third, uncatalogued frequency he could only label as us against the world. They had ordered a single slice of apple pie, and they were sharing it, each taking a small, deliberate bite before passing the fork to the other. It was inefficient. A logical distribution would involve cutting the slice in half. This was a ritual. As Xylar watched, an older man, a regular by the way Maya greeted him, shuffled in and sat at the end of the counter. He looked tired, his clothes worn, and when Maya asked him what he wanted, he just shook his head and asked for a glass of water. He was broke. It was a simple, brutal data point. The young couple in the booth exchanged a look. It was a communication faster than any data stream. A whole conversation compressed into a single glance. The boy nodded. The girl slid out of the booth, walked over to Maya, and whispered something, pressing a few crumpled bills into her hand. A moment later, a full plate of hot food appeared in front of the old man. He looked up, bewildered, first at the food, then at Maya, who just tilted her head towards the young couple. The old man met their eyes across the diner. He didn't speak. He just gave a slow, solemn nod. The couple, who clearly had very little themselves, had just allocated critical resources to a stranger for no strategic gain. It was an act of pure, illogical altruism. It violated every principle of resource management and self-preservation that governed every other species Xylar had ever cataloged. He was trying to reconcile this act with Skeeter's quantum conspiracy theories when the lights in the diner flickered violently, buzzed, and died. The sudden plunge into darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint red glow of the exit sign. The immediate response was a chorus of human noises, a gasp, a muttered curse, someone laughing nervously. The teenagers shrieked with a strange, delighted terror. For a moment, there was only the sound of shuffling and confused murmurs. Then, a new sound emerged. It was the soft, mournful strum of a guitar. In the corner booth, a man Xylar hadn't paid much attention to, a gaunt figure with a grizzled beard and a guitar case, had begun to play. He wasn't playing for an audience. He was just filling the silence. Then he started to sing. His voice was like Maya's laugh, full of gravel and broken things. But it carried a melody of such profound and simple sadness that it seemed to physically alter the space in the diner. He sang about a lost love, a long road, a home he couldn't go back to. The lyrics were a simple narrative, but the emotional data layered within the notes was infinitely complex. Xylar stood frozen behind the counter. His auditory sensors were taking in the frequencies. His processors were translating the words. But something else was happening. He was receiving a different kind of data stream, one that bypassed his logic centers entirely. It was a signal that resonated directly with the core of his newly formed physical body. His internal chronometer seemed to slow. His sensory filters registered a strange, aching pressure in his chest cavity. His diagnostic systems flashed a warning. Unidentified emotional state detected. Emulation or infection. He recognized the pattern from his archival studies. It was melancholy, loss, a sense of shared, beautiful pain. He was not observing it. He was experiencing it. The man with the guitar was transmitting his own personal narrative corruption, and everyone in the diner, including the auditor, was being infected. Just as the song's final, heartbreaking note faded into the darkness, the emergency generator outside coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. The lights flickered back on, paler and starker than before. The moment was broken. The spell was gone. The trucker was already back on his phone. The teenagers were giggling, and Maya was directing a busboy to check the main breaker. It was as if the shared moment of communal sadness had never happened, but Xylar had recorded it. It was now a part of him. He felt different, unstable. He retreated to the restroom where he had first materialized. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The face was the same, a statistically average human mask. But for the first time, he felt like there was something behind it. He had a mission to complete. He had to send his preliminary report to the elders. He closed his eyes, opened a secure quantum channel, and began to transmit. Subject Preliminary Diagnostic. File 34 Gamma. Earth. Status Unstable. The narrative corruption is not a flaw in a subset of the population. It is a core function of the species' operating system. Their logic is built on paradox. They weaponize inefficiency. They derive strength from sharing narratives of sorrow. He paused his transmission. The clinical language felt inadequate, and he struggled to find a term the elders would understand. He added a final line. Their system appears to be a form of controlled chaos. It is beautiful in its brokenness. Further analysis required. He sent the transmission. The reply was almost instantaneous. It was not a string of data or a complex query. It was a single, cold pulse of pure intent, a thought that felt like the chilling void between stars. The observer is compromised. The analysis is tainted by sentiment. You have one cycle to complete your directive. Excise the bug, or the observer will be sanitized along with the file. Xylar opened his eyes and looked at his reflection again. The elder saw his report as a sign of infection, and as he stood there, the ghost of a sad song still echoing somewhere deep inside him, he was no longer certain they were wrong. He was supposed to be the debugger, the one who fixed the system, but the system was now actively, irresistibly, debugging him. The elder's ultimatum resonated in Xylar's core programming not as a threat, but as a diagnostic fact. He was a tool, an extension of the archive's will. If a tool becomes corrupted by the material it is meant to shape, it is discarded. The logic was flawless. The problem was, Xylar was no longer certain he agreed with the premise. The concept of corruption was beginning to feel subjective. He walked out of the restroom, the diner's harsh fluorescent lights now feeling like an interrogation. He had one cycle, approximately 24 standard Earth hours, to identify and neutralize the source of humanity's narrative chaos. But how could he excise a bug that was woven into the very fabric of the operating system? It was like trying to remove the concept of wetness from water. He needed a new approach, a new target. His observations at the Starlight Griddle were too broad, too anecdotal. He needed to find a point of concentration, a node where the chaotic data wasn't just being consumed, but actively generated and amplified. He accessed the local human information network, a chaotic, seething ocean of data they called the Internet. It was the digital equivalent of a supernova, a constant, roiling explosion of creation and destruction. Sifting through the noise was like trying to find a single, specific grain of sand in a hurricane. But Xylar was an auditor. Order was his native language. He filtered out the commercial transmissions, the political posturing, the endless, screaming arguments. He searched for patterns of exponential replication, for data packets that achieved viral status not through corporate backing or state-sponsored propagation, but through sheer, inexplicable mimetic force. His search led him to a single, recurring name, Captain Anarchy. It was not a person, but a phenomenon. Captain Anarchy was a content creator, a live streamer who operated from an undisclosed location, broadcasting a nightly show that was a bewildering fusion of performance art, political satire, philosophical rant, and sheer, unadulterated nonsense. The captain's streams were legendary for their unpredictability. One night, he might spend 3 hours silently building a magnificent sculpture out of toast, only to destroy it with a leaf blower in the final minute. The next, he might host a serious, well-researched debate on quantum entanglement with a panel of sock puppets. He had an audience of millions, a dedicated, very fanatical following, who called themselves the Chaos Crew. They didn't just watch, they participated, flooding the stream's chat with a torrent of real-time commentary, memes, and suggestions that the captain would often incorporate into the broadcast, creating a feedback loop of escalating absurdity. Captain Anarchy was not just a source of chaos, he was a chaos engine. He was the bug, personified. Xylar triangulated the signal's origin point. It was not in a high-tech studio in a major city, but in a repurposed warehouse on the industrial outskirts of Reno, Nevada, less than 100 miles from the diner. This was it. This was the epicenter. He left the Starlight Griddle without a word, stepping out into the cold, pre-dawn desert air. He didn't need a vehicle. He simply calculated the destination and altered the probability vectors of his own location, folding space-time in a way that was, to an outside observer, indistinguishable from a very, very fast walk. He arrived at the warehouse as the sun was beginning to cast long, distorted shadows across the cracked asphalt. The building was a graffiti-covered metal box, unremarkable except for a satellite dish bolted precariously to its roof. The main door was unlocked. Xylar stepped inside. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, a hoarder's paradise of discarded technology, bizarre props, and half-finished art projects. In the center of it all was a makeshift studio, a green screen held up with duct tape, a jumble of cameras and monitors wired together like a cyborg's nest, and a single, worn-out armchair. In that chair, asleep and snoring softly, was Captain Anarchy. He was nothing like the charismatic, booming persona from the broadcasts. He was a small, pale man in his late 20s, with ink-smudged fingers and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of chronic sleep deprivation. He wore a faded t-shirt with a picture of a cartoon frog riding a unicycle. This was the architect of global mimetic contagion. This frail, unimpressive specimen, Xylar, stood over him, a silent, impassive judge. His directive was clear excise the bug. A simple Bussey's localized quantum erasure would be the most efficient method. No one would even notice he was gone. The broadcast would stop. The chaos engine would fall silent, and the narrative would, slowly, begin to heal. It was a clean, logical solution. Xylar raised his hand and focusing the energy required to de-res the man from reality. But he hesitated. His report to the elders had been flagged for sentiment. He needed to understand the why. Deleting the source without understanding its function was simply data removal. It was not true auditing. He needed to know what purpose this chaos served. He lowered his hand and waited. An hour later, the man woke with a start, blinking at Xylar with no sense of alarm, only a groggy confusion. "Oh, hey," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're early for the interview. Coffee's over there. It's terrible." "I am not here for an interview," Xylar stated. The man, whose real name was Leo, squinted at him. "Right, Fan. Then look, I appreciate you coming all this way, but the whole silent, mysterious stranger thing is a little derivative. Don't you think it's been done? Unless you're a government assassin, in which case, points for originality." Leo stretched, yawned, and shuffled over to a grimy coffee maker. "So, what's your deal? You're not from the IRS, are you? Because I can assure you, Captain Anarchy, LLC, is a fully registered, non-profit organization." Xylar decided to engage directly. "I have identified you as the primary source of a global narrative corruption," he said. "Your transmissions are a vector for conceptual entropy. I am here to understand its purpose before I neutralize you." Leo paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. He stared at Xylar, Then slowly, a wide grin spread across his face. "Oh, I get it," he chuckled. "This is a bit. You're a performance artist? That's fantastic. You've got the deadpan alien vibe down perfectly. Conceptual entropy. I love it. Can I use that?" He wasn't afraid. He thought Xylar was part of the show. This was a complication. "This is not a performance," Xylar insisted. "I am an auditor. My function is to preserve the integrity of reality's narrative. You are breaking it." Leo took a long sip of his coffee and leaned against a stack of obsolete computer monitors. He studied Xylar with a newfound interest, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his tired eyes. "Okay," he said. "I'll play along. Let's say you're a reality cop, and I'm a story criminal. What's my crime? What am I breaking?" "Coherence," Xylar replied. "Meaning. Your broadcasts are a cascade of non sequiturs. You juxtapose the sacred and the profane, the profound and the ridiculous, until they become indistinguishable. You take events of significance, and you reduce them to a meme, a unit of disposable, ironic commentary. You are teaching your species to laugh at everything, and therefore to value nothing." Leo was silent for a moment, his grin fading. "You think that's what I'm doing?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "You think the point is to make nothing matter, man? You've got it backwards. You've got it completely inside out." He gestured around the chaotic warehouse. "You see all this junk? This is what the world feels like to me. To a lot of people. It's a mess. It's a non-stop fire hose of information and tragedy and ads for things we don't need. It's overwhelming. You've got wars and climate change and political meltdowns on one channel, and on the next, you've got a puppy learning to walk. It's all hitting us at once, all the time. It doesn't make any sense. The narrative is already broken. Pal, it's been broken for a long time." He walked over to his command center, a chaotic tangle of keyboards and screens, and brought up an image on the main monitor. It was a live news feed showing a burning building, firefighters battling a massive blaze. The headline underneath read, "Historic Library Lost in Tragic Fire." "This happened last night," Leo said quietly. "Millions of books. Centuries of history. Gone. It's a tragedy. It's a loss of coherence. Right? A piece of the story. Just erased." Then he opened another window. It was his own chat feed from the night before, a frantic, scrolling waterfall of text. The Chaos crew had been watching the same news feed, but they weren't just watching. They were organizing. They were sharing links to digital archives, creating torrents of the library's collections, setting up mirror sites. They were using the same chaotic, decentralized network they use for sharing memes to save their own history. "I didn't tell them to do that," Leo said, his voice thick with an emotion Xylar's diagnostics identified as pride. "They just did it. They saw a piece of the story being destroyed, so they used the chaos to build a lifeboat. They laughed at the fire because crying wouldn't put it out. They made memes about it because it was a way of fighting back, of saying, 'You can't take this from us.' The chaos isn't the breakdown of the story. Auditor, the chaos is how we're trying to hold it together." Xylar stared at the screen, at the torrent of data that was simultaneously grieving and fighting, mocking and preserving. It was a paradox he could not resolve. He had come to excise a bug, the source of the noise. But the noise was the signal. The bug was the cure. His directive was to restore order, But he was beginning to suspect that humanity's chaotic, insane, and beautiful order was the only thing keeping their story from ending altogether. His hand, once poised to delete, now felt heavy and useless. The tool was broken, or perhaps, for the first time, it was finally working correctly. The revelation hit Xylar with the force of a cosmic ray, scrambling the perfect, crystalline lattice of his logic. He had spent eons observing narratives from a sterile distance, categorizing them, filing them away. He understood stories as sequences of events, cause and effect, beginning, middle, and end. Leo was proposing something far more radical, that a story wasn't just a record of what happened, but a living, breathing thing that could be defended, reinforced, and even healed through the collective, chaotic will of its participants. The Chaos crew wasn't erasing history with their memes. They were creating a distributed, redundant backup, encoded in the bizarre, resilient language of their culture. It was an act of preservation disguised as an act of desecration. It was the most brilliantly insane survival strategy Xylar had ever encountered. His directive from the Elders excised the bug now seemed not just flawed, but monumentally naive. It was like ordering a surgeon to cure a patient by removing their immune system. "Your model is inefficient," Xylar stated, the words coming out automatically, a reflex from his old programming. "It is predicated on random, decentralized action. There is no central command, no quality control. The data is corrupted with humor and frivolous commentary." Leo laughed, a genuine, unforced sound that echoed in the cavernous warehouse. "Welcome to Earth, my friend. Nothing is efficient. Life isn't efficient. It's messy and weird and full of mistakes. That's the whole point. We're not building a perfect archive. We're telling a story. And stories need to be a little bit messy. They need to have weird characters and dumb jokes and parts that don't make sense. That's what makes them feel real. That's what makes them worth fighting for." He gestured again at the screen, where the chat was now flooded with images of a cartoon phoenix wearing a fireman's helmet, rising from the ashes of the burning library. You see that's not just a joke. That's hope. That's resilience. It's a way of saying, we will rebuild. You can't put that on a spreadsheet. You can't file that away in a database. You have to feel it. And Xylar did. He could feel it. The raw, unfiltered data of human hope was pouring into him, not from a single source, but from millions of them at once. It was a chaotic, discordant symphony, but it had a clear, undeniable theme. His internal systems were flashing warnings, flagging his emotional processors for critical overload. He was supposed to be an objective observer, a silent, impartial auditor. Well, objectivity felt like a foolish luxury in the face of such overwhelming humanity. He was no longer just observing the story. He was becoming part of it. At that moment, a new transmission pierced through the quantum foam directly into Xylar's consciousness. It was the Elders. They had detected his hesitation, his prolonged engagement with the target. Their message was no longer a warning. It was a verdict. Auditor Trainee 714 is a failed unit. The corruption has spread, initiating Protocol 0 full narrative sanitation of the affected sector. The file and the auditor will be deleted simultaneously. Xylar felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with self-preservation. Protocol 0 was the archive's ultimate weapon, a reality-erasing wave that didn't just destroy a planet, but unwrote its entire existence from the timeline. Every person, every memory, every work of art, every stupid and beautiful meme would not just cease to be, It would have never been. The starlight griddle, Maya and her gravelly laugh, Skeeter and his quantum conspiracies, the young couple sharing a slice of pie, the old man with the guitar, Leo, all of it would be reduced to a blank page in the archive. It was the ultimate act of order, and the ultimate act of cosmic vandalism. "They're coming," Xylar said, his voice flat with the weight of the pronouncement. "They're going to erase everything." Leo looked at him, his usual ironic smirk gone, replaced by a look of sharp, focused intensity. "They, who's they?" "The reality cops, your bosses. They are the curators of reality," Xylar explained. "They see your world not as a home, but as a corrupted file, and they are about to hit delete." For the first time since Xylar had met him, Leo was silent. The full, impossible weight of what Xylar was saying settled over him. He walked to the warehouse door and looked out at the morning sky, as if expecting to see a fleet of warships. But Xylar knew it wouldn't be like that. There would be no invasion, no battle. There would just be a subtle shimmer in the air, a soft, final hum, and then nothing, an absence where a world used to be. "So that's it. Then," Leo said, his back still to Xylar, "some cosmic librarians decided our story is too messy, so they're just gonna burn the book." "Yes," Xylar said. "How long do we have?" Leo asked. Xylar calculated the temporal vectors, the speed of the approaching erasure wave. "At the current rate, 12 hours. Leo turned around, and in his eyes, Xylar saw not fear, but a familiar, terrifying glint of defiance. It was the same look he'd seen in the Chaos crew's reaction to the library fire. It was the look of a species that had stared into the abyss so many times that the abyss was starting to get nervous. 12 hours, Leo repeated, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. Okay, we can work with that." He strode back to his command center, his movements suddenly filled with a manic, terrifying purpose. "You came here to find the bug, the source of all the chaos." "Right," he said, his fingers flying across his keyboard, bringing multiple systems online. "Well, you found him, but you've got the diagnosis wrong. Chaos isn't the disease, it's the cure. And we're about to give your bosses a lethal dose." He slammed a large red button on his console, and the entire warehouse roared to life. Lights flashed, servers spun up, and a massive screen behind him flickered on, displaying a single iconic image, the grinning, anarchic mask of Captain Anarchy. "You wanted to see the Chaos Engine," Leo yelled over the din. "I'm about to turn it up to 11. He cracked his knuckles and turned to Xylar, his eyes burning with a feverish light. "All right, reality cop," he said. "Your bosses want a clean face and orderly narrative. Well, we're about to give them the messiest, loudest, most batshit insane story the universe has ever seen. We're going to fight their perfect but silent order with our beautiful, glorious noise. We are going to weaponize absurdity. We're going to weaponize hope. We're going to weaponize every stupid cat video and philosophical sock puppet debate and piece of toast art we've ever created. We're going to fight the end of the world with the only weapon we have left, a really, really good punchline." Xylar stood amidst the rising tide of controlled chaos, the hum of the machines vibrating through the floor, through the soles of his feet, and into the very core of his being. His directive was to excise the bug. His new self-generated mission was to save the file. But how he was an auditor, a being of pure logic and order. He didn't know how to fight. He only knew how to observe. "What is your plan?" Xylar asked. Leo grinned, a wild, manic look in his eyes. "Plan? We don't have a plan. That's the beauty of it. Plans are orderly. Plans are predictable. We're going to improvise. We're going to do what humanity has always done when faced with certain death. We're going to put on a show." And as the countdown to his own deletion began, Xylar, the failed tool of a perfect silent archive, made a choice. He was no longer Auditor Trainee 714. He was now a member of the Chaos Crew, and for the first time in his long existence, he had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating feeling he had ever known. The countdown had begun, not on a screen, but in the subtle, chilling hum that now permeated the very air of the warehouse. It was the sound of reality being unwritten, the background noise of the universe being tidied up by an unseen hand. Xylar felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, a static crackle in his thoughts. It was the approach of perfect, absolute silence. Leo, however, seemed to thrive on the deadline. The impending doom had focused him, sharpening his manic energy into a diamond hard point of creative fury. He didn't see an executioner's clock. He saw a show timer. "Okay, Xylar, my favorite interdimensional auditor," he said, not looking up from his console. "You know these guys, you know how their big, beautiful brains work. What breaks them? What's the one thing their perfect, orderly system can't handle?" Xylar processed the query. It was the most important diagnostic he would ever run. He sifted through millennia of the Elders' logic, their pristine principles, their unshakable axioms. The answer was surprisingly simple. "Paradox," he said. They cannot compute a self-contradictory truth. Their entire existence is based on the principle that a thing cannot be A and not A at the same time. To them, that is not a complexity. It is an error message. And he paused, a new thought taking shape, forged in the chaotic fire of Leo's studio. And love, he added, the word feeling strange and heavy in his vocalizer. They understand it as a biological imperative for species propagation. They do not understand it as a motive for illogical, self-sacrificial, and utterly pointless acts of beauty. Leo's grin was a slash of light in the dim warehouse. "Paradox and pointless acts of beauty," he repeated, savoring the words like a fine wine. "Boys, we've got a show to put on." He slammed his hand on the console, and the Captain Anarchy mask filled the main screen. He went live. There was no preamble, no witty intro. His voice, broadcast to millions across the globe, was raw and urgent. "Chaos Crew," he began. "I have a question for you, and it's the last question I might ever ask. What is the point, not of the universe, not of life? None of that grand-scale garbage. What's the point of you? What is the one true, stupid, beautiful, heartbreaking, hilarious thing you've ever done that made no sense at all? But you'd do it again in a heartbeat." He leaned into the camera, his eyes wild. "I'm not looking for your highlight reel. I want the glitches. I want the B-sides. I want the stories you tell no one. Send them to me. All of them. Right now. We're going to build a monument to glorious human nonsense, and we are going to aim it at the stars. Let's show them what a beautiful error message we are. Go." What happened next was not a broadcast. It was a planetary exorcism. It was the digital equivalent of every human on Earth simultaneously emptying their pockets, their closets, and their souls onto the world stage. Xylar, at Leo's direction, had opened every conceivable data conduit, transforming the Captain Anarchy network from a simple streaming service into a global intake valve for the human condition. The first transmissions were a trickle, then a flood, then a tsunami. Skeeter, the trucker, sent a tearful, rambling video message, not about his conspiracies, but about the time he drove 300 miles out of his way to return a lost dog, a secret he'd never told his wife. The young couple from the diner sent a single, grainy ultrasound image with the caption, "We were running away. Now we're running toward something." A world-renowned physicist submitted a 500-page paper detailing his unified field theory, followed immediately by a crudely drawn comic about his cat, who he believed was the true author. There were deathbed confessions and first crush poems. There were schematics for perpetual motion machines scrawled on napkins and symphonies composed entirely of kitchen appliance noises. A billion acts of petty revenge and a billion acts of radical forgiveness arrived in the same data packet. "It's not enough," Xylar said, his own system straining to catalog the influx. "It's chaotic, but it's still just data. We need to weave it into a single, paradoxical narrative." Leo nodded, his face illuminated by the glow of a dozen monitors. "Way ahead of you, buddy." He began to work like a mad composer, not just receiving the data, but mixing it. He took the physicist's theory and set it to the trucker's confession, creating a heartbreaking equation of love and loss. He synced a video of a baby's first laugh with the sound of a soldier weeping. He took every submitted image, trillions of them, and began weaving them into a single, impossibly complex fractal, a visual representation of their collective story, where a picture of a supernova contained the image of a child's birthday party, which in turn contained the blueprint for a failed invention. He was building a story that was simultaneously about everything and nothing, a narrative that was tragic and hilarious, brilliant and idiotic, hopeful and despairing, all at the same time. The hum in the air grew louder, the pressure more intense. The erasure wave was here. The lights in the warehouse flickered and died, but the monitors, powered by a dozen backup generators, blazed defiantly in the dark. "They're at the door," Xylar said. "It's time," Leo whispered. He took the impossibly complex file, the fractal poem, the paradoxical symphony, the ultimate testament to humanity's beautiful mess, and he didn't broadcast it. He aimed it. Using Xylar's knowledge of quantum frequencies, he pushed the entire narrative directly into the approaching wave of silence. He fed the story to the bug fixer, for the elders floating in their sea of perfect thought. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. They were not met with resistance. They were met with a story. They felt the sting of a forgotten lullaby and the illogical warmth of a stranger's kindness. They experienced the profound, soul-crushing grief of losing a pet, immediately followed by the transcendent, brain-breaking comedy of watching a man slip on a banana peel. They understood the paradox of a parent who would die for a child they had just been screaming at. They processed a joke whose punchline was the meaninglessness of existence, and they felt the involuntary, inexplicable urge to laugh. Their perfect, orderly consciousness was flooded with the glitches, the contradictions, the beautiful, pointless emotions that defined human life. The logic of Protocol Zero began to break down. To erase this story would be to leave a hole in their own understanding of reality. To erase this beautifully chaotic file would be an act of vandalism. The silence faltered. The erasure wave, a tool of perfect, unassailable logic, hit a paradox it could not solve. And it simply stopped. Back in the warehouse, the pressure vanished. The suffocating hum was replaced by the familiar whir of the servers. Outside, the sun was rising. They had done it. They had held a planet hostage with a punchline, and the universe had blinked. Leo slumped in his chair, utterly spent, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Xylar stood beside him, silent. His own internal chronometer informed him that his designated lifespan was over. He should have been deleted along with the file, but he was still here. He had a choice. He could try to return to the archive, a corrupted file seeking its place back on the shelf, or he could stay. He looked at Leo, asleep in his chair, a foolish grin on his face. He looked at the screens, now filled with messages from the Chaos crew, celebrating a show they didn't understand, but knew in their bones was the most important thing they had ever been a part of. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability. A week later, Xylar sat at the counter of the Starlight Griddle. The coffee was still terrible. Maya slid a plate of eggs in front of him. "You again," she said, her voice holding its usual weary rasp, but her eyes held a spark of something new curiosity. "You figure out the point of a joke yet?" Xylar took a sip of the coffee, letting the acrid bitterness wash over his senses. He thought of the elders, now silent, not with the silence of order, but with the stunned silence of an audience after the story is over. They hadn't destroyed Earth. They had reclassified it, from file corrupted to file ineffable. It was now a protected narrative, a story too beautifully broken to ever be edited again. He looked at Maya. "I believe I have," he said. "The point of a joke is to remind you that the universe is a story written by a brilliant, but hopelessly insane author." Maya stared at him for a beat, then let out that familiar, gravelly laugh, and for the first time, Xylar, the former auditor, the bug in the system, the newest member of the Chaos crew, laughed with her.